Story 3 of Young Readers' Science Fiction Stories by Richard Mace Elam. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Story 3, The Space Mail Run. The way he felt now, Jerry Welsh was almost sorry he had left Earth. The moonship landing seemed to be crushing the very life out of him, although he lay flat on a couch to ease the strain. Jerry turned his head toward his father, who was strapped down like himself. And suffering, too. The craft was under its own control, for no human could withstand the rocket's present speed and still be able to steer in for a landing. Captain Welsh was on his bi-weekly mail run to Luna, the moon, and for the first time in 10 years of service he had a passenger, his own 12-year-old son. At last Jerry felt a hard jolt under him. He knew the rocket's tail fins had finally touched ground. Jerry unstrapped himself with rubbery fingers and sat up. Then he tried to stand, but flopped down again. "Wow, I feel giddy," he groaned. His father laughed. "You'll get your bearings presently, son." How long Jerry had waited to make this space mail run with his father. Then finally last year Captain Welsh had said that Jerry could go with him when he became 12, as he was especially husky and strong for his age. But now that the great moment had come at last, Jerry wasn't sure he was enjoying it as he had expected, for he had found space so vast, so dark, and so frightening. "Do you still want to be a spaceman, Jerry?" his father asked suddenly, as though Jerry had spoken his thoughts aloud. I think so, Dad," he replied hesitantly. "I see you're doubtful, Jerry," Captain Welsh said. "I won't put you on the spot so early." They climbed into space gear, electrically heated suits and clear plastic helmets fitted with radios. Lastly, they donned oxygen tanks and flooded their suits with the life-sustaining gas. They gathered up the mail sacks and climbed down the ladder to the ground, heading for the largest of a group of buildings which made up Moon Haven, center of Earthmen's activity on the airless planet. The stars burned fantastically bright overhead. Traces of frost topped the distant lunar Alps. It was incredibly cold out here, for the moon was in its 2-week period of night. Captain Welsh got a receipt for the largest mail bag, and then he and Jerry went out a rear door of the building carrying the rest. An atom-powered mail car awaited them. It had an open top and huge wheels that looked like saw-toothed gears. "Climb aboard the moon jeep, Jerry," his father said. "We've got 10 mail deliveries to make." Inside, Captain Welsh pulled down a section of the dash panel revealing a map. "Here's a map of our route. There aren't many mail stops on the moon yet, but they're all important." "And the mail must go through," Jerry added. Captain Welsh nodded soberly. "Well, that's the first law, Jerry." As they moved off, Jerry saw the big friendly globe of Earth hanging like a green jewel halfway up the jet-black sky. He wondered what his mother and baby sister were doing this moment, 250,000 miles away. Captain Welsh showed Jerry how to run the jeep. Jerry found this easy, for he had already had a course in mechanics in preparation for his future career as a spaceman. But some time later their peaceful ride was interrupted when Captain Welsh suddenly leaned over and grabbed the wheel. Jerry was thrown to the side as the car swerved. The vehicle straightened out and slammed to a halt as his father controlled the wheel and applied the brakes. "What happened?" Jerry breathed, his heart pounding. His father pointed behind them. "Look!" Jerry turned and saw the edge of a treacherous ditch running right across the roadway where they would have passed over. The gorge was several feet wide. "I didn't even see it," Jerry murmured, sick with fear at what might have happened. This wasn't the first time he'd been shaken on this journey. It made him wonder, as he had once before, if he had what it took to be a spaceman, or if this adventure would make him decide never to leave the atmosphere of Earth again. "Scared?" his father asked. Jerry nodded. "Don't worry, I was too for a moment." "You were?" Jerry asked with surprise. "Fear was given to man so he could save himself from danger, Jerry," Captain Welsh said. "Don't be ashamed of it. Fear is nothing to be ashamed of unless you let it get the best of you. Never forget that." They arrived at their first delivery point, an engineering project on a plateau surrounded by mountains. There were the foundations of great buildings to come, constructed of hard lunar granite. The space-suited figures came running when they recognized Captain Welsh and his mail car. Jerry marveled how the formerly stern expression of the workmen brightened when the foreman handed mail out to them. "It must be fun bringing mail to men who are so far from their homes and families," Jerry said when they were on their way again. "I guess that's why I've put up with the lonely hours of seeing nothing but stardust for the past 10 years," Captain Welsh answered. "But I love it, son, and I wouldn't trade jobs with any man." Their next delivery site was a cavern where men were prospecting for uranium. They too were overjoyed at receiving messages from home. The jeep rolled on from there to a huge plane which was being prepared for a future spaceport. Captain Welsh and his helper dropped off another mail sack and then were on their way again. Some hours later, all but 2 deliveries had been made. "Next stop is the Astronomy Observatory," Captain Welsh told Jerry. They crawled over sandy hills that taxed the gripping power of their spiked wheels, wound in and out of towering buttresses of black basalt, and bored through natural tunnels like a pair of human moles. Then the observatory came into view. A smiling little scientist with thick glasses signed for the mail at the door. He invited Jerry to come back and visit the place before he returned to Earth. "You haven't seen anything until you look through their great telescope," Captain Welsh told Jerry as they drove off. "What's our last stop?" Jerry wanted to know. "A geology camp where some scientists are digging into ancient rocks," his father said. "It's only about 7 miles away, but the going will be a little rough before we get there. It's a good thing it's our last stop, because we don't have any too much oxygen left in our shoulder tanks. I usually don't take this long on a mail run." The roadway carried them through a narrow pass with a high hill of loose rock on one side and a sloping embankment on the other. Jerry's first warning of trouble came when he was flung suddenly forward. He heard the sickening drag of the wheels as his father's boot hit the brakes. Just ahead of them he saw a cascade of rocks sliding down the hill. The next moment Jerry felt an even harder blow as the jeep was grazed by one of the large boulders. The small car was swept out of the roadway like a toy and rammed against a pillar at the cliff edge. Jerry screamed in fear as he felt himself being thrown out of the car. He struck the ground hard and began rolling head over heels down the precipice. When the numbing shock of his fall had worn off, Jerry climbed dazedly to his feet and looked up the slope down which he had been thrown. "Dad!" he cried. He slipped and scrambled up the incline in reckless haste. He found Captain Welsh sprawled unconscious just below the upper brink of the precipice. Jerry knelt and looked into his face through the clear plastic helmet. His father's eyes were closed and there was an ugly bruise on his forehead where it must have struck the helmet in his fall. "What am I going to do?" Jerry groaned aloud. He himself would have to make the decisions and carry them through if the 2 of them were to survive. It was a shocking thought. Then it came to him what his father had said about fear. A person need never be ashamed of fear so long as it was not permitted to get the upper hand. Jerry pulled his father up onto the roadway and tried to bring him around, but without result. Jerry examined the jeep. One side was badly smashed, but the engine still appeared sound. The car was tipped over against the rock column. Jerry was thankful that the jeep was only 1/6 of its earth weight on the moon. It was a tremendous effort, but he finally righted the car and got it back on the road. He jumped into the front seat and started the engine. It sputtered and then hummed into activity. Jerry studied the map on the panel. He located their present position by the giant crater, Plato, at his distant right. Then he traced the winding route leading to the geology camp. He was closer to the camp than the observatory, but ahead lay a rugged route, one with which Jerry was totally unfamiliar. He got out and went back to where Captain Welsh lay. "Which way should I go, Dad? Ahead or back?" he asked helplessly, just as though his father were able to answer him. Something told him that Captain Welsh would want him to go ahead, to finish the mail run that had never missed a round in 10 years. Jerry got his father into the back seat, then gunned the Jeep and struck off into the unknown ahead. He was thankful for the old worn trail that led the way for him. It presently carried him through a gloomy valley. Jerry switched on his headlights, but the twin spears of brightness gave him little comfort in the spooky place. Grotesque rock columns rose like menacing ghosts on both sides of him. At last he was out in the open again. The road led him around the steep edge